Good stuff. Well, we've been talking on Sunday morning about the book of Galatians. We were digging in the last 2 weeks about faith. The first message a couple weeks ago was walking by faith. The second one was called the promise. And we were talking about how in Colossians, the second chapter, it says the same way that we get saved is the same way that we're supposed to continue to live, which is by faith, which was really radically different than what the Jews believed before the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that change came through the Apostle Paul and the disciples who taught that we are redeemed or justified by faith. So, Nigel, if I was going to say, what's the difference for you between being justified by faith and being justified by works? What would you say is the biggest difference there?
The biggest difference?
Yeah. What's the difference between those two?
When you're justified by works, it depends on your performance. You have to do things you got to do.
Yep.
You got to get certain things done. Kind of like if you're a job, you're justified by your works. If you work at Dollar General, you got to do this. You got to stock the thing.
Yeah.
And you're going to get, you're going to decide whether to give you a raise or something by your performance, by your works.
Nice.
But with Jesus, it says that by grace through faith we've been saved, and actually that's Paul, and that's in Romans. So that's Paul actually when he was written to the Roman church, and he was telling the Roman church that it's by faith through grace that you're saved. So if you're justified by faith, you're justified by what Jesus did on the cross, and nothing we do earns that faith. We don't have to be justified by works because Jesus did the work for us.
That's a really, really great way of putting it. It really is. That totally makes sense.
Totally put me on the spot, don't you?
Yeah, well, sometimes that's when the best stuff comes out.
But I know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Well, I think what's interesting too is that like when we go to a job, we have like performance reviews at our job, right? Are you actually doing your job? And I think that because it's like we live in an environment or a world that really is performance based, it's difficult to really understand that Christianity and how Jesus looks at us and how Christ thinks of us is different. I think one thing that Paul says is, if you want to talk about doing the works, it's not just, if you want to talk about fulfilling the law, it's not just one law. You have to fulfill all the law, not just one piece or one part, which is absolutely impossible. And in fact, the Bible says that as a result of that, we actually, under the law, it's a curse because the law demands, perfection, right? And Paul was actually talking about that. He uses a verse in Deuteronomy to talk about how anybody who hangs on a tree is cursed, right?
Right.
And how Jesus bore that curse so that we could be blessed. So, Paul just is constantly putting in there, listen, we are justified by faith. Our relationship with Christ isn't, and I like how you put it, isn't about what we do, but about what Christ did on the cross.
Yeah.
And that's what the difference between being justified by faith and being justified by works.
Now, that doesn't mean that you don't do any works, faith, because it also says in James, faith without works is dead, and sometimes people get messed by that.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you're not saved by grace through faith. That means that you have to apply your faith for it to work.
Yeah.
You can't just sit there on your couch and just immediately, God's going to come through, I'm just going to sit and do nothing.
Yeah.
No, you have to say, if you want healing, then you need to get scriptures that talk about healing and confess those scriptures and stand on it.
Yeah.
Maybe you go there. Maybe you, I remember, when I haven't told this story forever, but I remember when I was in college at OCC, when I was still under your youth group, I was in the youth membership. You probably remember when this happened.
Yeah.
One Sunday night, we had Sunday night group. I had the bass drum. We had to move the thing and set up everything, and I dropped it on my foot, and and my toe was all black and blue and nasty, and I could barely walk the next day. And I got to go to school. I had 3 classes at OCC, and it's uphill. If you know anything about OCC, it's up and down hills.
Yeah.
But I just kept walking on it and standing in faith and praying for it all day. So at first it hurt really bad to walk on it, but by 4, Monday was my longest day that year, and by the time it was towards the end of the day, I started feeling better, and I got excited because you know what, I seem to be able to walking a lot better,
Yeah.
And I let you know, like that night and that morning, it was black and blue. I was excited because I felt better. I get home like 7, 8 o'clock at night, take my shoe off, the black and blueness is gone.
Wow.
What did I do? I walked by faith.
Literally.
That means I had to do the work. I couldn't have just said, "Oh, I could have complained. Oh, I can't go to church. I have to whatever." And there's been other times. There's another time where I didn't feel good, and God told me to get up and go to class. That's what I need to do, and I did. And within 20 minutes of going to class, He healed me.
Yeah.
He was like showing me that by showing your faith. How many times I don't want to get too far into this, but how many times there were times where Jesus said, I've never seen such faith. Yeah. He was always honored people by their actions, by them showing that, you know what, I believe that you're going to heal me. When that's what the difference is. Yeah. So that's the difference is why it says in James that faith without works is dead, because unless you do something to apply your faith, God can't reward you. But at the same time, your faith, there's two different things. Your faith as in becoming saved has to do all with Jesus and the cross.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about faith after that for everything, you sometimes have to make a stand. You sometimes have to do something in order to see God move. He is not always going to reward. If we don't show that we're confident in Him and we're just sitting there, God sometimes will speak into our lives that we need to have actions to go with our faith. So if that makes sense, I'm hoping that makes sense if you're listening today, that you see the difference between, okay, just because we have faith to get saved, just because we're not justified by our actions doesn't mean that we don't have to do something, that God won't have us do something in order to show that we have faith. Does that make sense?
It does. And I was actually meditating last night on the scripture in Romans 4 about how Abraham didn't consider his own body, and he didn't consider Sarah's body as far as just having the promised son of Isaac. And he simply received the promise. And sometimes I find myself like considering a lot. You know what I'm saying? Like I was telling, and I know it's getting late, but I was, our food pantry, funding, started to kind of get kind of low. And I was considering all these different things. Do I need to? Is it worth writing all these grants? It's taking a lot of my time. Should I just be believing God, or connecting with people more at the church, or, is it maybe should I be looking at other grants? All these different things I was considering, and I felt like the Lord. I was actually listening to I'm not a total fan of everything he preaches, but Andrew Womack. I was listening to him a little bit, and he was just saying in one of his messages, you have to stop limiting God. There was a point in his life where he was limiting God in his own life, and I thought to myself, my gosh, I feel like that, And yesterday it was so interesting because one grant that I hadn't applied for, they just gave to us that showed up, and then another organization that I didn't even know that they were going to give ended up giving, and before you know it, our account has like $6,000 in it, like in just one evening. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
And it was like if I had been continued to consider, putting all that on my shoulders, the food pantry isn't my pantry; it's God's pantry. I'm just happen to be here to help it. You know what I'm saying? So, but anyway, thanks, Nigel. I love it when you talk about faith.
Yeah.
I really do. Awesome. Well, we're going to go into another song and then your top 10.